They say, the deepest pain isn't being forgotten, it's being present, yet unseen. I can't remember the last time someone called me Clara. Not honey, not her, not my wife, but Clara, a name that once made someone smile, once rang out in sunlit afternoons. Now, it only exists on utility bills, prescription refills, and in my own memory. Have you ever felt like you're living with people, but no one really sees you? If you've ever stepped out of your bedroom, made breakfast, cleaned every corner, listened to everyone's stories, and no one asked, "Are you okay?" Then maybe you're living like Clara.
I'm Clara. I'm 62.
I'm not dead, but I'm not truly alive either, not in the way that counts. Each morning, I wake up before my alarm, not because something exciting awaits, but simply because sleep has long abandoned me. The early light creeps through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust in the air like memories not yet fully formed. I stand in the kitchen, pouring warm water into a chipped green teapot, a wedding gift from Jonathan's mother. The faint scent of mint drifts into the room, as if trying to fill the quiet space between two people who once loved each other deeply, but now only share a roof, not a gaze. Jonathan hasn't changed. He moves with the precision of the Swiss watch he wears. 7 a.m. downstairs. 7:15 boiled eggs and toast. 7:30. Out the door with a quick, I'm off. No kiss on the cheek. No lingering look. No, how are you? I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just fading. Like the framed picture hanging in our dining room. Once carefully chosen, once admired by guests. Now no one even looks up. It's still there, but no one sees it anymore. That afternoon, I stood in the backyard, the garden I've nurtured for nearly 2 decades. The lavender swayed in the crisp autumn breeze. I stared at them for a long time, then suddenly wondered, if I disappeared tomorrow, would they wither? Not because I matter, but because would anyone water them? My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Company gala this Friday. Come with me. Dress code. Formal. No question mark.
No worms.
I read the message, and somehow it felt colder than the October air outside. Has he ever truly wanted me there for me? Or was I just the accessory beside him in the company photo? I could have said no, but my fingers typed. Okay. Not because I wanted to go, but because I wanted to know, would anyone see me that night? Out of hundreds of eyes in that room, would even one truly see me? That night, I tried on an old navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years. I pinned my silver hair back into a simple bun, added a soft touch of blush to my cheeks. I looked in the mirror. It was still me, but something had shifted. I wasn't trying to be beautiful. I was just trying to see if I was still here. Some nights seem like they'll pass by just like all the others, but instead they awaken a woman who had long fallen asleep in the story of her own life. Speech balloon, leave a comment if you've ever felt like the one in the background. So we know we're not alone. Bell and subscribe to this channel. If you believe it's time for women to be seen not just for the roles they fill, but for who they truly are. The sharp click of heels against marble echoed with a rhythm, crisp and uneven. Much like my heartbeat that evening, the Grand Meridian Hotel's main hall sparkled under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Deep red velvet drapes cascaded from the towering ceiling, and a jazz band played softly in the background, like a soundtrack for a world both elegant and distant. Jonathan walked beside me in a perfectly tailored gray suit, navy tie, and eyes filled with intent. But not for me. His attention was fixed on the guests he was about to greet, the partners he needed to impress, and the toasts he'd rehearsed in his mind. "You're at table 8, he said, eyes still scanning the crowded room. "Some of the wives you met last year are over there. I'll be over there for a bit. There are people I need to see before dinner." I nodded, not surprised, not disappointed, just used to it. I took my seat like a well-placed centerpiece, elegant, appropriate, and invisible. To my left was Mrs. Fairchild, the CFO's wife, who seemed to love Chanel more than her husband. To my right, Mrs. Huxley, who looked like she had already eaten before arriving and was simply here to people watch. I smiled politely when needed, nodded at the right moments, raised my glass just enough. But inside, my mind drifted elsewhere. Something felt wrong within me, and I knew it had been there for a long, long time. And then, I saw him. Daniel Reeve, Theo. The man Jonathan always spoke of with a mix of reverence and wariness. He stood near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, conversing with a board member, tall poised, with a presence that seemed to anchor the room. I had seen him before at many events, but never like this, because this time he was looking at me. It wasn't a scanning glance. It wasn't polite acknowledgement. It was a gaze that paused. That saw, as if he had just recognized something old, quiet, but still burning. I looked away, suddenly aware of the heat rising in my cheeks. Told myself it was just my imagination, but when I glanced back, he was still looking. Moments later, he began walking toward me. "Mrs. Bennett," he said in a deep, steady voice. "I hope this isn't too forward, but may I steal you for a moment?" I froze. The women at the table turned toward us, half curious, half stunned. I nodded, standing before I realized what I was doing. I followed him as if stepping into a dream, hazy, uncertain, but somehow inevitable. We turned down a quiet hallway where the light grew softer, and the music behind us faded like the echo of a different world. Daniel opened the door to a private lounge, silent, dimly lit by a vintage table lamp and the soft glow of a faux fireplace. He gestured for me to sit in a large leather chair. He took the one across from me, this powerful, distant man who suddenly seemed remarkably sincere. "I apologize if this makes you uncomfortable," he said. I'm just curious," I replied, my voice steady though my throat felt tight. Daniel looked at me. No smile, no small talk, just presence. I wanted to speak privately because, if I didn't say it, I wasn't sure anyone ever would. He paused, drawing a soft breath as if weighing each word. "I've been watching you, not just tonight. Over the years. At events, in company hallways, even when you stepped out of the car with Jonathan. And there's something I can't stay silent about anymore." My heart began to pound, not out of fear, but because something in his voice, firm yet gentle, seemed to peel back layers I had carried for decades. "You're not being seen," he said, softly, but it thundered inside me. "It's not that you're not beautiful or worthy of attention. It's that no one has given you the space to truly exist." I didn't speak. I just sat there. My fingers clutched the edge of my dress. My nose stung with the feeling of something breaking, just beneath the surface. "Jonathan is a good man," Daniel continued. "But even good men can be unseeing. He sees you as part of a stable life system, but forgets you are also a soul." I don't know how long passed, but when he finally stood to return to the gala, he paused at the door and said, "You don't need to say anything. Just don't bury what you're feeling right now. Some truths may make you uncomfortable, but sometimes that's how a new life begins." I returned to the ballroom, but it felt like stepping into an old world, while my mind had already left it behind. Jonathan was laughing with some colleagues. When he noticed me, he nodded, then turned back to his conversation. I stood there like a shadow, but this time, I saw the shadow. There are moments that don't touch your hands, don't brush your lips, but somehow, they reach the deepest part of your soul, the part that's been silently waiting to wake up. Some words don't make you cry right away. They don't trigger an outburst. They cut deep, quietly, cleanly, like a razor-thin line etched into your soul. His words, "You're not being seen," took root in me like that. I sat frozen in that waiting room for several minutes after Daniel left. No one asked me to stay. No one was holding me back. But I remained, as if my heart hadn't caught up with my feet. The artificial flames in the fireplace danced across the wall. The leather chair felt colder than I expected. The room wasn't large, but it had transformed, suddenly becoming a space I had avoided all my life. A space where the truth echoed louder than I was ready to hear. I clasped my hands together. They trembled slightly, unintentionally. I wasn't afraid of Daniel. I wasn't afraid of his words. I was afraid. I believed them. "I'm not being seen." I repeated that sentence in my mind. And then, like water seeping through stone, memories began to return. Small ones, quiet ones, but undeniable. The times I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my dress, and Jonathan never looked up. The evenings I cooked his favorite soup, and he ate it without asking who made it. The parties, the vacations, the calls where I was just there. No name.
No introduction.
No eye contact. I've become the background in my own life. I am not a fragile woman. I've loved fiercely, rebelled, once left my teaching job to follow Jonathan to another state and start over. I built a home, raised 2 children, cared for my mother-in-law until her final breath. I had once lived like fire. Now, I was only the reflection of that fire, cast down from the ceiling light. I left the waiting room and returned to the ballroom. Jonathan was still deep in conversation. When he saw me, he nodded, with the indifference of someone who thought I had simply gone to get a napkin. That night, I sat beside him through the entire dinner. He asked nothing. I said nothing. A conversation had just happened, one powerful enough to change a life. But the man beside me had no idea. On the drive home, soft jazz played on the radio. Jonathan kept his eyes on the road, his head straight ahead. "So, how was the gala?" he asked, his voice flat. "It was interesting," I replied, staring out the window. "Yeah, everything went well. The new partner seemed happy." And then silence. Not another word. We got home like 2 strangers who just happened to share an address. Jonathan went straight into his study, like he always did, checking emails. I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on the oak countertop, eyes locked on the empty space he had just passed through. The fluorescent light revealed the sunspots on my hands, the soft folds by my eyes. I caught my reflection in the microwave door. A woman no longer young, no longer glowing, but still holding on to one thing that hadn't been extinguished, her own gaze. I let myself fade for too long, because I was afraid that if I stepped into the light, no one would be there beside me. But what's more terrifying is living without feeling alive. I walked into the bedroom, took off my earrings, brushed my hair. But before turning off the light, I paused. I looked at myself in the mirror. For a long time,
No makeup.
no evening gown, just a 62-year-old woman, and a question that rose inside her for the very first time. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone actually notice? Sometimes what a woman needs isn't roses, isn't flattery, but simply a gaze that lingers long enough to remind her of who she used to be. Some questions don't come in the form of words. They arrive in a lingering glance that lasts 1 second too long, in the silence between 2 people who were once inseparable, or in that hollow feeling when you sit in your own home and quietly ask, "Who am I in this story?" The next morning, Jonathan had already left for work. On the dining table sat an untouched slice of toast, with a thin streak of jam, dragged across like a cold, indifferent cut. I reached for the still warm teacup, took a sip of peppermint, and found it strangely flavorless. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt an emptiness opening inside me. Not to welcome something new, but to finally face something old that I had been avoiding for decades. I began to ask myself the questions I had never dared to ask. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I was terrified that the answers might change everything. Do I still love Jonathan? Or do I just love what we used to have? A beautiful past, a warm memory, a wedding photo in a frame. Are we still really husband and wife? Or just 2 quiet people sharing a roof? One yielding space, the other occupying time, neither truly seeing the other? If today were my last day on earth, what would I do? I didn't want the answer to be, make the bed, water the plants, wait for dinner. The more I thought, the more I realized I had been trained to stay silent. I used to think I was strong, a resilient woman, someone who endured, who was understanding, selfless, low maintenance. I was praised for being patient, for never complaining, for not being like those other wives. But now I understand. My patience wasn't a virtue. It was quiet surrender, one small piece at a time of myself. I remembered the times I laughed off being ignored, the times I convinced myself he was tired, busy, needed space. And me? I quietly retreated from the center of my own life, making room for everything else he prioritized. In 40 years I had never asked, "What do I want?" I only ever asked, "What would you like to eat? What do the kids need? Will this bother anyone? We're fine, right?" I lived to preserve everyone else's peace, and I called it love. I stood in front of the mirror for the second time in less than 24 hours.
No lipstick.
But something in my eyes looked different. Not sad, not happy, just awake. Clara, if he came to you right now, looked into your eyes and asked, "What do you want?" What would you say? I didn't know. And that "I don't know" cut deeper than any blade. I remembered what Daniel had said. Do you remember the last time you were truly seen? I looked down at my hands. Hands that had delivered babies, wiped sweat from fevered foreheads, chopped vegetables night after night, rested on her husband's shoulders when he was tired. Now, they were simply folded in silence, as if asking permission to exist. I walked into my small home office. On the desk sat an old photo, me and Jonathan in 1985 by Lake Michigan. I stared at that young woman, bright eyes half smile, arms wrapped around her husband's neck like she feared nothing in the world. "Where did you go, Clara?" I whispered. "Are you still in there somewhere?" I opened my laptop, not to work, not to scroll through social media. I opened a blank document and typed, "I want." Just writing those two words brought me to tears, not out of sadness, but because it had been so long since I let myself want anything at all. There are women who don't leave their families. They just leave themselves a little more each day, until one day they no longer recognize the person in the mirror. And then one morning, they ask, "What do I want?" A small question, but powerful enough to awaken an entire life. That night on the ride home, the city faded behind the car windows like an old film playing in reverse. Chicago at night was still alive, bright lights, honking horns, buildings that never seemed to sleep. But inside our car, the world had fallen silent. Jonathan drove as he always did, hands at the correct positions on the wheel, back straight, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "How was the gala?" he asked, his voice flat and even. "It was fine," I replied. "Nothing more." "Yeah, the meeting with the Korean partners went smoothly too." And then silence again. I turned to the window, drawing an absent-minded line in the fogged-up glass. My body was in the car, but my heart was still back in that quiet lounge, where a near stranger had said something that reminded me who I was. No, it wasn't because Daniel was handsome. It wasn't about his status or power. It was because he looked at me as if I was still alive. I glanced over at Jonathan, the man I had spent my entire youth beside. His forehead carried more lines now. His hair was more salt than pepper. His jaw still firm, just like it had been in his 30s. I once loved that face. I once melted at the sound of his voice. But now, even as he sat beside me, just inches away, why did he feel farther than ever? When we got home, Jonathan removed his tie, hung up his blazer, and headed into his office, just like every other night. "I'm going to check emails for a bit." "Okay," I said. Same word, same tone, but this time after I said it, I stood still for a long while, as if hearing my own voice for the first time, and realizing how empty it sounded. I walked into the kitchen and flipped on the light. The cool white glow fell across familiar objects, the stove, the fridge, the coffee maker, and a framed wedding photo resting on the oak shelf. Picked it up. There I was in a simple lace dress, Jonathan in a black suit, two young people radiant, holding hands as if the whole world waited for them to step into it. We were once those people, but now, I wasn't sure I still recognized the woman in that photo. I went into the bedroom, took off my earrings, wiped away the faded lipstick. In the mirror I saw my eyes, deep, still, and different. It was the gaze of someone who had just been awakened, not by a new love, but by a single beam of light, shining into a darkness I'd lived in for so long. I lay down in bed but didn't sleep. My mind kept returning to Daniel, not to his words, but to how I felt when he spoke them. A stirring, not the reckless thrill of an affair, but a quiet quake inside me, something alive. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt like that. It wasn't love. It wasn't infatuation. It was just, I was seen. Daniel never called me beautiful. He didn't say I was attractive. He simply said, "I see you," even when no one else in the room does. And somehow, that simple sentence made me want to come back to life. No, I don't want to have an affair. I'm not looking for a secret romance. I just want to be a person again, with real feelings, not buried under the label of a good wife. I glanced toward Jonathan's side of the bed, still empty. He was probably reading his last email of the day in his office. I found myself wondering, if he had ever looked at me the way Daniel did, would I be crying right now? Probably not, because people only cry like this when they've been seen completely. After years of being invisible, a stirring doesn't always come from love. Sometimes, it comes from a single moment, when someone looks at you with their whole soul and reminds you, you're still worth being here. Have you ever sat next to someone you love and felt like an ocean was between you? Ever longed for a single glance, a sincere question, and received nothing but a familiar nod and another stretch of silence? Clara didn't cheat. She simply began to realize she deserves to be present. Speech balloon, share your thoughts if you've ever felt a stirring, not because someone was attractive, but because they saw something your loved ones stopped seeing. You're not alone. Bell, subscribe to the channel if you believe women shouldn't have to leave or rebel just to remember who they are. Come along this journey of awakening, where we learn to love ourselves again. The next morning, the kitchen was as quiet as always. The coffee cup sat in its usual place. The toast was golden crisp, just the way Jonathan liked it. Only one thing had changed. I wasn't the same woman as yesterday. I didn't rush to brew peppermint tea, didn't hurry to do the laundry, wipe the counters, or organize the pantry. I just stood at the window, watching the trees tremble in the autumn wind, and inside me echoed old questions I had never dared to answer. If no one needed my care, no one to worry about, no one to stay quiet for, who would I be? Jonathan came down the stairs. Same steps, same pale blue shirt, same cologne he'd worn for the past 15 years. I turned to look at him, longer than usual, as if trying to measure the distance between two people who once stood so close. I've got a meeting this morning. Might be home late, he said. I know, I replied, smiling. But this time the smile didn't come from patience. It came from something quietly forming inside me. A decision. Jonathan gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, out of habit, then left. The door clicked shut. The house returned to its familiar stillness. But this time, I didn't want to continue being familiar. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Not tea, not peppermint, just coffee, black, strong, and bitter. I sat in the wooden chair in the corner of the kitchen, the spot where I usually read. But today, I didn't open a single page. I just stared at the steam rising from the cup, as if waiting for a signal from within. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter in Boston. Mom, can I call you next weekend? Super busy. I smiled. This was the same little girl who used to cry and cling to my leg, begging not to go to school. Now she's juggling tech contracts, flights, and conferences. Everyone is living, except me. I was merely existing. I set the cup down, picked up the phone, opened my contacts, scrolled for a while, then paused on a name, Daniel Reeve. I don't remember when I saved his number. Maybe Jonathan had sent it once in case I needed to contact him for something. But until today I had never, not once, hit call. I stared at the number. My thumb hovered over the button, then pulled back, then hovered again. My heart was pounding. You're out of your mind, Clara. What are you doing? A whisper in my head. It's just coffee. It means nothing. Or maybe it means everything. I closed my eyes and pressed call. 3 rings. Then, Daniel Reeve. I'm sorry if I'm disturbing you. Clara? His voice was surprised but gentle. I just wanted to ask, would you happen to have time for a coffee this morning? A short pause, then softly, Ido. An hour later, I stepped into a cafe by the lake. Small, warm, golden lights and the scent of freshly baked butter pastries filled the air. I chose a seat by the window where I could see the glassy lake. Autumn leaves spun gently through the air, like even time itself had learned to soften. Daniel arrived right on time. Still that simple, understated suit. But something about him made the space around him quietly shift. When he saw me, he nodded. Not eager, not performative, just present. I didn't think you'd call, he said. Neither did I. I smiled. For the first time, a smile not for him but near him. We sat across from each other, surrounded by the aroma of coffee and the soft clinking of spoons against porcelain nearby.
No rush.
No pretending. Just two people, sharing a moment unnamed. You know, I said, gazing out at the lake. This morning, I didn't wash the dishes, didn't wipe the table, didn't brew tea. I just made a cup of black coffee and sat still. Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time in years, I continued. I didn't do anything for anyone else. I just wanted to hear what my heart had to say. And what did it say? He asked gently. I was quiet for a while, then looked him in the eye. It said, I want to come alive again. Not run away. Not chase anyone. Just come home to myself. Sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee. Not for conversation. Not for networking. But simply to prove that woman is still here. She hasn't disappeared. She's just been silent for far too long. Outside the window, the lake remained still, smooth like glass. Golden maple leaves drifted gently from the trees, spinning through the air like a silent ballet. No audience, no applause, but achingly beautiful. Inside that quiet little cafe, Daniel and I sat across from each other. Two people who thought we had nothing left to begin, not to start a relationship, but to open a door that had been locked from the inside for far too long. Daniel stirred his espresso, eyes never leaving mine. But this wasn't the look of a man enchanted by beauty. It was the gaze of someone witnessing a soul quietly finding its way back home. And he waited. I still don't really know what I'm doing, I sighed, watching the dark coffee ripple gently in the cup. I don't even know what to call this feeling. It's not rebellion. It's not some irrational infatuation. It's just, I don't want to stay silent anymore. Daniel nodded. You don't need to name it. You just need to listen to it. For the first time in how long? I pressed my lips together, then gave a small, bitter smile. Maybe since the day I signed our marriage license. I told him about the years I had lived, but not truly been alive. About how I had always placed everyone else before myself. About Jonathan, my husband, who wasn't a bad man, but had become a companion who no longer walked beside me. And about myself, the woman who had lost her voice so gently, she hadn't even noticed it was gone. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't jump in with advice or fill the space with noise. He just sat there like a mirror, quietly reflecting back to me a version of myself I had long forgotten. Clara, he said softly, his voice deeper, more grounded. I'm not here to change you. I don't want to be the reason behind any decision you make. I only hope you remember that there's a part of you still alive, still brilliant, and that part doesn't belong to anyone else. It is yours. I looked at him for a long time. Everything around us seemed to blur into the background. All I could hear were those words that stirred something buried deep within me. The most beautiful part of you isn't gone. It's just been waiting for you to come back and see it. I smiled. For the first time in months, maybe even years. I smiled not out of politeness, not to maintain peace, not for anyone else. I smiled because I finally felt myself returning. Daniel, I don't know what will happen after today. I don't even know if I have the courage to change anything. But I do know one thing. I've been quietly waiting for myself for far too long. We left the cafe just before noon. The lake breeze was cool but fresh. Daniel walked beside me slowly, saying nothing. I didn't feel led. I didn't feel held back. I just felt seen by someone who didn't need me to be anything to be worth noticing. We stopped at a wooden step overlooking the lake. You don't have to decide anything right now, he said, voice soft as the wind. Just promise yourself you won't keep denying your own feelings. I nodded, slowly, as if signing a quiet contract, not with him, but with myself. Before leaving, Daniel turned to me one last time, his eyes calm, unwavering. Clara, not everyone gets the chance to see themselves again. You've begun. Keep going, even if it's alone. Not everyone who enters our life is meant to stay. Some people arrive simply to guide us back to ourselves, and sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee, a single sentence, a quiet morning, to begin again. Night fell softly, like an old silk scarf settling over the shoulders of the world. In the kitchen, the warm golden light cast a gentle glow across the familiar objects. A white porcelain salt jar, the wall clock with its hands forever slightly askew, and the oak table worn smooth by years of quiet meals. I sat there, silent, waiting, not for Jonathan to come home, but for myself, to be brave enough to speak. For the first time, after decades of living like a gentle shadow, the door opened. The metallic click of the key in the lock sounded dry and final. Jonathan walked in. His suit slightly wrinkled, tie loosened, and the lingering scent of antiseptic clinging to his jacket from a long day at the office. He didn't look at me right away. He walked past, dropped his keys into the tray, took off his watch and let out a tired yawn. I'm back. Traffic was awful today. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, longer than usual. He paused, glanced at me, perhaps a little puzzled. What's wrong? You okay? I nodded, then lifted my head and said softly, Jonathan, could you sit down for a minute? I need to talk. It had probably been years since I'd said that sentence. Not to ask about groceries, not to mention a leaky pipe, but simply, I need to talk. He looked surprised, but pulled out a chair and sat across from me, his eyes cautiously searching mine. What's going on? Is something wrong? I took a deep breath, and then I didn't look back. I don't even know where to begin, but I need to say this. I love you. I've never stopped loving you, but I feel like I've become invisible. Jonathan's brow furrowed. Invisible? What do you mean? I placed my hands on the table. They trembled slightly. I've been here, Jonathan, for 40 years, by your side, raising our children, keeping the home, holding everything together. I've never walked away. But do you see me, Jonathan? Really see me, as a wife, as a woman, as a soul, not just the background character in your life? The air between us froze. Jonathan stared at me, clearly unsettled. Clara, why would you think that? I've always been here. I gave a soft smile. Not bitter, not sad, just awakened. Being here isn't the same as seeing. You look past me, not into me. You love me out of habit, not out of presence. I looked down. My eyes welled. I don't blame you. Truly, I don't. I contributed to this too. I stayed quiet, afraid to upset you. Afraid to break the rhythm of what we called normal. Afraid you'd see me as weak. Then I looked up again. But that silence has erased me inside my own marriage. Jonathan didn't say a word.
No excuses. No defenses.
He just stared at me, as if seeing his wife for the first time, and realizing he had never really known her. So what do you want, Clara? His voice was so soft, I almost didn't hear it. I met his gaze. I want to live, not just survive. I want to be seen. I want to stop waking up each day asking myself, do I even exist anymore? I paused, and finally said the words I hadn't been able to say even to Daniel that morning. If there's still hope for this marriage, then you have to return too. Really return. As the man who once saw me, once held my hand, once promised I wouldn't walk this life alone. Jonathan lowered his head, rubbing his face with his hands. I had never seen him like this. Unguarded, unscripted, and unmasked. Just a man, finally realizing what he had forgotten for far too long. I didn't know you felt this way. I just thought silence meant things were okay, that no fighting meant we were fine. I placed a hand over my heart. No fighting is what happens when someone stops hoping. We sat there, two people who had spent nearly a lifetime together, but who for the first time were facing each other as two individual souls, without leaning on nostalgia or duty. I'm not leaving you, Jonathan, but I won't continue disappearing either. If we want to save this marriage, then we have to start over, like two people who've just met. No pretending anymore. Ending things isn't always the answer. Sometimes, the bravest act is to sit down, look into the eyes of someone who once loved you, and speak the truth, not to blame, but to begin again, for real. That morning I didn't need anyone to wake me.
No alarm. No noise.
Just something within me. a soft breath-like pull, nudging me to open my eyes and rise. Not because someone needed me, not because I had to prepare something for someone else, but because I wanted to. That feeling, so simple yet unfamiliar, was like stepping into the world of my own life for the very first time. After years of standing outside the door, I brewed myself a cup of coffee, black.
No cream, no sugar.
Just strong, bold, bitter. Much like who I am now, no longer trying to sweeten myself to be easier for others to swallow. I sat in the wooden chair by the window, the one I used to call the waiting chair. Because I always sat there waiting for someone to come home, for the phone to ring, for my husband to notice. But this morning, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I simply sat with myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I looked out at the backyard. The maple trees blazed crimson, like they were burning the last of summer into ash. Leaves scattered the stone path, each one falling silently but decisively. They didn't ask permission to fall. They didn't apologize for changing colors. And I thought, maybe we too reach a point where we must let go of old branches to live a life that is true and beautifully in tune with the wind. I used to think freedom was a luxury reserved for the young. But no, freedom is when you can sit quietly, brew a cup of coffee for yourself, and softly admit, I am worthy. When I was younger, I believed love was my purpose. Then, as a wife and mother, I believed that service was how I held happiness together. Now, I don't believe in any theory. I only know this. If day after day passes, and I can't feel myself, then that's not living. That's climate-controlled survival. I stood up. No schedule. No to-do list. Just a beige linen dress I loved. One I hadn't worn in 3 years because it was never the right time. I added a touch of lipstick, not to look better, but to remind myself. These lips still have things to say. I walked out the door like a woman learning how to step back into her own rhythm. No one waved. No one called after me. And oddly enough, I felt lighter than I ever had. I strolled to the corner bakery, ordered a warm apple tart and a cappuccino.
No sharing.
No takeaway for anyone else. Just me alone savoring each bite. Not to impress, but to thank myself for choosing to show up fully present. On the walk home, I slowed in front of the little bookstore I used to love. I stepped inside, bought a journal, not to jot down errands, but to write line by line the things I once loved and had forgotten. When I got back, Jonathan was home. He sat at the dining table. His eyes followed me, but he didn't speak. I looked at him, not with resentment, not with expectation, only with the hope that this time he would see. Where'd you go? He asked. Not accusing, not demanding, just real. I smiled softly. I went to meet myself again. It's been a while. That evening, I sat at my desk, once cluttered with bills, appointments, grocery lists. I opened my new journal. On the first page I wrote, I give myself permission to want. I give myself permission to change. I give myself permission to live fully, without needing a reason. They say America is the land of opportunity, but I think the greatest opportunity here isn't about earning or climbing higher. It's the chance to begin again, no matter your age, your past, or your situation. In this country, people don't ask, why are you starting over now? They ask, are you living true to who you are yet? I was once the perfect wife, the devoted mom, the soft-spoken woman, but now I choose to become something else, a woman who is fully alive. Jonathan sat beside me, quiet for a moment. Then he said gently, Clara, I didn't realize you'd gone so far inside yourself, but if I may, I'd like to walk back with you. I said nothing, just smiled and reached for his hand, not as a symbol of forgiveness, not to pretend nothing had happened, but to open a new journey, where I'm no longer the one left behind. You don't have to scream to be seen. You just need to see yourself, and take that first step, and the world will make room. Don't wait for someone to hand you your freedom. Freedom doesn't come from permission. It begins the moment you choose to live, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Speech balloon if you've spent too long living for others and forgot yourself along the way. Write just one line below. I'm coming back. Let that be our starting point right here, right now. Bell subscribe to the channel to never miss these quiet awakenings. Not loud, not forced, just real. And gently yours.